The morning sun cast long shadows across downtown Brooklyn as Mike Tyson stepped out of his black SUV. At 67, the former heavyweight champion still carried himself with the quiet power that once made him the most feared man in boxing. His driver, Marcus, a young man from the neighborhood, pulled away with a respectful nod. Mike had come to visit the community center, where he mentored kids every Tuesday morning. But something felt wrong. The streets were unusually quiet. No children playing. No elderly folks sitting on stoops. Even the bodega owners had pulled down their metal gates despite the early hour. Mike's instincts, honed by years in and out of the ring, told him danger was near. The first sign of trouble came as distant sirens wailed through the morning air. Not the usual single patrol car responding to a minor incident, but the coordinated symphony of multiple units moving with purpose. Mike paused at the community center's entrance, his weathered hands gripping the door handle as he listened to the growing cacophony. Then he heard it. Shouting. Not the playful calls of neighborhood kids, but the sharp, panicked voices of people in genuine fear. Mike turned toward the sound, his heart rate quickening. 3 blocks away, smoke was beginning to rise above the apartment buildings. Against his better judgment, Mike walked toward the disturbance. Each step brought the sounds into sharper focus. Police radios crackling with urgent commands. The heavy thud of boots on pavement. And underneath it all, the cries of civilians caught in something they didn't understand. As he rounded the corner onto Fulton Street, Mike saw the scene that would change everything. Dozens of police vehicles had surrounded a 4-block area. Officers in riot gear were systematically going door to door, forcing residents from their homes. But this wasn't an evacuation for their safety. This was something else entirely. An elderly woman stumbled out of her apartment building, pushed by 2 officers who seemed more interested in speed than care. She fell to her knees on the concrete, her grocery bag spilling its contents across the sidewalk. Apples rolled into the gutter while she tried to gather herself, confusion and fear written across her weathered face. Mike's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough injustice in his lifetime to recognize it instantly. This wasn't standard police procedure. This was chaos dressed up as law and order. A young mother emerged from the same building, clutching her toddler against her chest. The child was crying, overwhelmed by the noise and commotion. An officer barked orders at her to move faster, his hand resting threateningly on his weapon. The woman's eyes darted frantically, searching for help that wasn't coming. That's when Mike noticed the news vans positioned at strategic distances, their cameras rolling to capture every moment. But they were too far away to see the individual faces of terror, too distant to hear the personal pleas for mercy. To them, this was just another story about urban unrest and police response. Mike pulled out his phone and called Marcus. "Turn around and come back," he said quietly. "And call my lawyer. Tell him to get down here fast." As he waited, Mike watched more residents being forced from their homes. An elderly man, using a walker, was given no assistance as he struggled down the steps of his building. A teenage girl was separated from her family and herded toward a different group of civilians. The systematic nature of it all made Mike's blood run cold. This wasn't random. This wasn't even about crime or safety. This was about power and control, wielded against people who had no voice to fight back. The SUV pulled up beside him, and Marcus rolled down the window with wide eyes. "Mr. Tyson, what's happening here?" "Something that ends today," Mike replied, his voice carrying the same quiet intensity that once preceded his most devastating knockouts. "I need you to start recording everything you see. And I need you to call everyone you know with a camera or a social media account. Tell them to get down here right now." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. "You're not thinking of getting involved directly, are you?" Mike looked at the young man with the hint of a smile that held no warmth. "Marcus, I've spent my whole life fighting. Sometimes in the ring, sometimes outside it. Today, these people need someone to fight for them." As if summoned by his words, another commotion erupted near the corner grocery store. A family was being dragged from their business, their pleas for explanation falling on deaf ears. The father was trying to protect his teenage daughter while his wife clutched their ledger book, the record of their life's work. Mike had seen enough. The storm was here, and it was time to step into it. He walked toward the nearest group of officers, his presence immediately drawing attention. Some recognized him, their postures shifting slightly as the legendary boxer approached. Others simply saw a potential problem to be managed. "Gentlemen," Mike said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise with surprising clarity, "I think we need to talk." The real fight was about to begin. The lead officer, a thick-set sergeant with sergeant stripes barely visible beneath his tactical vest, turned to face Mike with the kind of dismissive authority that comes from years of unopposed power. His nameplate read Rodriguez, and his eyes carried the hardness of someone who'd forgotten that the badge was meant to protect, not intimidate. "Sir, you need to move along. This is a restricted area," Rodriguez said, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. Behind him, 3 other officers had stopped their forced evacuations to watch the interaction. Mike stood his ground, his posture relaxed but unmistakably solid. "I'm Mike Tyson, and I live in this community. These people are my neighbors. I have every right to know what's happening here." The sergeant's expression shifted slightly. Recognition flickered across his features, followed quickly by calculation. Arresting a celebrity would bring unwanted attention, but backing down would undermine his authority in front of his men. "Mr. Tyson, we're conducting a lawful operation under emergency powers. These residents are being relocated for their own safety while we investigate potential terrorist activity in the area." The lie came so smoothly that Mike almost admired the man's skill. Almost. Instead, he pulled out his phone and held it up, making sure the recording light was visible. "Terrorist activity? In Mrs. Johnson's bakery? In the Martinez family grocery? Sergeant Rodriguez, with all due respect, that's complete nonsense, and we both know it." The use of his name caught the sergeant off guard. Mike had made a point of reading the nameplate, a small psychological tactic that immediately personalized their interaction. It was harder to dismiss someone who knew your name. More residents were being herded past them, and Mike's trained eye caught details that the average observer would miss. The selection wasn't random. They were targeting specific buildings, specific families. The wealthy brownstones 3 blocks over were untouched, while the rent-controlled apartments and small businesses were being systematically cleared. "Look around, Sergeant," Mike continued, his voice steady but growing in intensity. "You're not evacuating people for their safety. You're displacing them. And I'm guessing someone with deep pockets and political connections has a very different vision for this neighborhood." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to move along, or I'll be forced to." "To what?" Mike interrupted, stepping closer, not threateningly, but with enough presence to remind everyone within earshot exactly who they were dealing with. "To arrest me for asking questions about what's happening in my own community? Go ahead, Sergeant. Make that call." By now, Marcus had positioned himself across the street with his camera, and other residents who'd been forced from their homes were starting to take notice. A few pulled out their own phones. The news vans, sensing something developing, began moving closer. Mrs. Chun, an 80-year-old woman who'd run the corner laundromat for 30 years, was being escorted past their group by 2 officers. She looked up at Mike with recognition and desperation. "Mr. Mike," she called out, her accented English thick with emotion. "They say I can't go back to my business. They say it's dangerous, but I was just opening for the morning. Nothing dangerous. Just washing clothes like always." Mike looked directly at Rodriguez. "Mrs. Chun has been in this neighborhood longer than you've been alive, Sergeant. Her laundromat is the backbone of this community. What possible terrorist threat could she pose?" The sergeant's radio crackled to life before he could respond. A voice requested his status and timeline for clearing the remaining buildings. Rodriguez turned away to answer, giving Mike a moment to approach Mrs. Chun. "Don't worry," he told her quietly. "This isn't over. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" "My daughter lives in Queens, but all my things, my business." Her voice broke slightly. "I'm going to make sure you get back to your business, Mrs. Chun. That's a promise." Rodriguez finished his radio call and turned back, his patience clearly exhausted. "Mr. Tyson, you're interfering with a police operation. I'm placing you under arrest for obstruction of justice." The words hung in the air like a challenge issued in the ring. Mike had faced down opponents who outweighed him, politicians who tried to destroy him, and his own demons that nearly consumed him. A corrupt sergeant with delusions of absolute power was just another fight. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Mike said, his voice dropping to the tone that once made grown men reconsider their life choices. "You can try to arrest me. You can even succeed. But every camera in this area is now recording. Every phone in this crowd is uploading to social media. And every news outlet in the city is about to have a very interesting story about police harassment in Brooklyn." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Or you can answer some simple questions about why you're displacing law-abiding citizens from their homes and businesses without proper legal justification. Your choice." Rodriguez looked around, suddenly aware of how many recording devices were now focused on him. The tactical situation had shifted completely. What started as a routine operation with minimal oversight had become a public spectacle with Mike Tyson at the center. The sergeant's radio crackled again, more urgently this time. A voice was demanding to know why the operation had stalled and requesting immediate confirmation that all civilians had been cleared from the target zone. "Target zone," Mike repeated, having heard the transmission clearly. "Sergeant, that doesn't sound like an evacuation. That sounds like preparation for something else entirely." Rodriguez's face flushed red. He'd lost control of the situation, and everyone present knew it. The careful choreography of the morning's operation was unraveling in real time, broadcast live to anyone with an internet connection. "All units, maintain positions," Rodriguez finally said into his radio. "We have a situation that requires assessment." Mike nodded slowly. "Now we're getting somewhere. Let's talk about what's really happening here." The standoff on Fulton Street had drawn a crowd that no amount of police authority could disperse. Word had spread through social media faster than any official response could counter it. Mike Tyson was facing down corrupt cops in Brooklyn, and the entire internet was watching. Rodriguez's superior arrived within 20 minutes, stepping out of an unmarked sedan with the bearing of someone accustomed to cleaning up other people's mistakes. Captain Sarah Mitchell was a 20-year veteran with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She surveyed the scene with professional disgust. "Sergeant Rodriguez, report," she said curtly, ignoring Mike entirely. "Captain, we were proceeding with Operation Clearwater as ordered when this civilian began interfering with—" "Operation Clearwater," Mike interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut through Rodriguez's explanation. "Captain Mitchell, that's an interesting name for what looks like illegal displacement of residents." Mitchell finally turned to face him, her expression neutral, but her posture tense. "Mr. Tyson, I presume. You're interfering with legitimate police business." "Then make it legitimate," Mike replied. "Show me the court order. Show me the emergency declaration. Show me anything that gives you legal authority to remove people from their homes and businesses." The captain's slight hesitation was all the confirmation Mike needed. There was no legal authority. There were no court orders. Operation Clearwater was something else entirely. Marcus, still recording from across the street, caught the exchange perfectly. The live stream he'd started on Mike's social media accounts now had over 50,000 viewers, and climbing. Comments flooded in from around the world, people demanding answers and expressing outrage at what they were witnessing. "Captain," Mike continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded attention from presidents and world leaders, "I'm going to ask you directly. Who ordered this operation? Who benefits from displacing these specific residents? And why are the expensive condos 3 blocks over completely untouched?" Mrs. Chun, who'd been standing nearby with several other displaced residents, stepped forward despite her fear. "Captain, please. I just want to go back to my business. I have customers coming today. People depend on me." Other voices joined hers. The elderly man with a walker wanted to return to his apartment, where his late wife's photographs were still on the mantel. The young mother needed to retrieve her daughter's medication from their refrigerator. Each story was personal, immediate, and heartbreaking. Mitchell's radio erupted with urgent chatter. Her dispatch was demanding an update on the operation's progress, and there were references to the developer, and the timeline that made Mike's blood run cold. "Developer," he said, seizing on the word. "Captain, this isn't about public safety at all, is it? This is about real estate development. Someone wants this land, and you're clearing it for them." The captain's composure cracked slightly. "Mr. Tyson, you're making serious accusations without evidence." "Then prove me wrong," Mike shot back. "Let these people go back to their homes. Call off your operation. If this is really about safety, you can address any genuine concerns through proper legal channels with proper notification." A new voice joined the conversation, coming from behind the police lines. A man in an expensive suit was making his way through the officers, speaking urgently into his cell phone. Even from a distance, Mike could see the man's agitation. "Ah," Mike said, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "And here comes the man with the real authority." The suited figure was James Hawthorne, a developer whose name appeared on half the gentrification projects in Brooklyn. His presence confirmed everything Mike had suspected. This wasn't a police operation. It was a business operation disguised as law enforcement. Hawthorne approached Captain Mitchell with barely concealed fury. "Captain, what is the meaning of this delay? We have deadlines to meet and contracts to fulfill." The admission hung in the air like a smoking gun. The live stream exploded with comments as viewers realized they were witnessing corruption in real time. News outlets were already picking up the feed and broadcasting it nationwide. Mike stepped toward Hawthorne, his presence immediately causing the developer to step back. "Mr. Hawthorne, would you care to explain to these residents why they're being forced from their homes? And perhaps you could share the details of these contracts you mentioned?" "This is a private business matter," Hawthorne stammered, suddenly aware of how many cameras were focused on him. "The city has determined that this area requires redevelopment for the greater good." "The greater good?" Mike's voice rose with indignation. "Sir, these people are the community. Mrs. Chun has served this neighborhood for 30 years. The Martinez family has fed people from their grocery store through 3 generations. You're not improving the community, you're destroying it." The crowd of displaced residents began to find their voice, emboldened by Mike's advocacy. They shared their stories, their connections to the neighborhood, their fear of losing everything they'd built. The narrative that Hawthorne and the police had tried to control was slipping away from them completely. Captain Mitchell realized the situation was spiraling beyond recovery. "All units, stand down," she ordered into her radio. "Cease clearance operations immediately." "Captain," Rodriguez protested, "we have our orders." "Your orders have changed, Sergeant," she replied firmly. She turned to address the crowd. "All residents are free to return to their homes and businesses immediately. This operation is suspended pending further review." The cheer that went up from the crowd was audible for blocks. People began moving back toward their buildings, but many stayed to see what Mike would do next. The battle had been won, but everyone sensed the war was far from over. Mike walked over to Mrs. Chun and offered her his arm. "Let me walk you back to your laundromat," he said gently. As they walked, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Mike, why did you help us? You could have walked away." Mike paused, considering her question. "Mrs. Chun, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but I've learned that when you have the power to help people, you have the responsibility to use it. Today, you needed help. Tomorrow, I might need yours." The simple wisdom in his words captured the essence of community that Hawthorne's development plans would have destroyed. But Mike knew that winning one battle wouldn't end the war. Powerful interests were still aligned against these residents, and they would regroup and try again. The real fight was just beginning. The victory on Fulton Street lasted exactly 18 hours. By the following morning, Mike received a call from his lawyer, David Rosenberg, with news that confirmed his worst fears about the forces they were truly fighting. "Mike, they're playing hardball," David said, his usually calm voice tight with concern. "Hawthorne Development has filed injunctions claiming you incited a riot and interfered with lawful city business. But that's not the worst part." Mike sat in his kitchen, coffee growing cold as he listened to the legal machinery spinning up against him. "What's the worst part, David?" "They've got City Hall involved. The mayor's office issued a statement this morning calling yesterday's events an unfortunate misunderstanding and announcing that the Fulton Street Revitalization Project has full municipal support. They're calling it urban renewal. Urban renewal, the euphemism that had destroyed countless communities across America, always promising improvement while delivering displacement. Mike had studied enough history to know exactly what those words meant for Mrs. Chun and her neighbors. And there's more, David continued. They've scheduled an emergency city council meeting for this afternoon. The agenda lists public safety concerns and expedited development approval. Mike, they're trying to fast-track the entire project before any organized opposition can form. Mike looked out his window at the Brooklyn skyline, thinking about the families he'd met yesterday. The young mother with her toddler, the elderly man with his walker, Mrs. Chun with her 30 years of serving the community. They were about to be erased by bureaucratic language and backroom deals. David, what would happen if a significant number of residents showed up at that council meeting? Officially, they have the right to public comment. Unofficially, the meeting could be moved to a smaller venue or rescheduled with minimal notice. These things happen when the city doesn't want public input. Mike was already reaching for his car keys. Then we better make sure they can't avoid public input. Within an hour, Mike was back on Fulton Street, but this time he wasn't alone. Marcus had brought his younger brother and 3 cousins, all with cameras and social media accounts. Mrs. Chun had called her daughter, who arrived with a van full of Chinese-American community activists. The Martinez family had reached out to the Latino Business Association. Word spread through the networks that connected Brooklyn's diverse communities. Korean shopkeepers, Jamaican church groups, Italian social clubs, and Jewish community organizations. People who rarely interacted were finding common cause against a threat they all recognized. Mike stood on the steps of Mrs. Chen's laundromat, addressing the growing crowd with the same intensity he'd once brought to press conferences before championship fights. They think they can wear us down with legal paperwork and bureaucratic meetings, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the street. They think we'll get tired and go home. They think we'll forget about Mrs. Chun and Mr. Martinez and all the families who make this community what it is. The crowd murmured agreement, but Mike could sense the underlying fear. These were working people with jobs and families. They couldn't afford lengthy legal battles or missed workdays. The system was designed to exhaust them through attrition. But here's what they don't understand, Mike continued, his voice rising with passion. This isn't just about one street or one neighborhood. This is about whether communities have the right to exist or whether everything gets sold to the highest bidder. A news van from Channel 7 pulled up, followed quickly by reporters from 3 other local stations. The story had legs, and media attention was exactly what Hawthorne Development didn't want. Mike's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Tyson, we need to talk. J.H. James Hawthorne wanted to negotiate. That was a good sign. It meant the pressure was working. But Mike had learned long ago that negotiations from a position of weakness rarely ended well for the weaker party. Mrs. Chun, Mike called out, would you like to come with me to City Hall this afternoon? The elderly woman's eyes widened. Me? I'm just a laundromat owner. You're not just anything, Mike replied firmly. You're a business owner, a community member, and a taxpayer. You have more right to be heard at that meeting than any developer. By noon, 3 chartered buses were loading up with residents and supporters. Mike had called in favors from friends in the entertainment industry, and several celebrities had agreed to attend the council meeting. The optics alone would make it impossible for the city to ignore or minimize. The city council chamber was designed to hold maybe 200 people comfortably. More than 800 showed up, forcing the meeting to be moved to the convention center with less than an hour's notice. The mayor's office tried to limit public comment to 5 minutes total, but the crowd's unified response made it clear that wasn't acceptable. Mike found himself appointed as the unofficial spokesperson, a role he'd never expected but felt surprisingly natural in. When his name was called for public comment, he approached the microphone with the same focused intensity that had once carried him to the heavyweight championship. Council members, Mr. Mayor, my name is Mike Tyson, and I'm here representing the residents of Fulton Street and the broader Brooklyn community that will be impacted by the proposed revitalization project. He paused, looking directly at each council member in turn. Yesterday, I witnessed law enforcement officers removing elderly residents from their homes without proper legal authority, without adequate notice, and without regard for their safety or dignity. This was done to facilitate a private development project that will destroy a functioning, vibrant community. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the packed auditorium. Mike continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. I've heard the arguments about economic development and tax revenue, but I want you to look at the people behind me. He gestured to the crowd. These aren't statistics or obstacles to progress. These are your constituents. These are the people who built this city, who work in this city, who deserve to live in this city. The mayor, Harold Weinstein, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mike's presence had transformed what should have been a routine approval process into a very public examination of city priorities. Mrs. Chun, Mike said, stepping back from the microphone, would you please tell the council about your business? The elderly woman approached the microphone with obvious nervousness, but her voice was clear and strong as she spoke about her 30 years of service, her customers who depended on her, and her fear of losing everything she'd worked to build. One by one, residents told their stories. The council chamber fell silent as the human impact of the development project became impossible to ignore. These weren't abstract policy decisions. They were real lives hanging in the balance. When the public comment period ended, Councilwoman Rodriguez, no relation to the sergeant, requested a recess to discuss the matter privately. But Mike knew that private discussions were exactly where democracy went to die. The real battle was about to begin in earnest. The private recess stretched into 3 hours, during which the packed convention center became a community organizing session unlike anything Brooklyn had seen in decades. Mike moved through the crowd, learning names, hearing stories, and watching something remarkable unfold. A neighborhood was becoming a movement. Mrs. Chun sat with the Jamaican church ladies, discovering they'd been shopping at each other's businesses for years, without really talking. The Korean shop owners were comparing notes with the Latino Business Association about rent increases and permit harassment. Young activists were teaching elderly residents how to use social media to document their stories. When the council finally reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted completely. What started as a routine approval hearing had become a referendum on development versus displacement, profit versus people. Mayor Weinstein looked visibly strained as he called for order. After careful consideration, the council has decided to table the Fulton Street revitalization project, pending further community input and environmental review. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Mike noticed the careful wording. Tabled wasn't rejected. Environmental review could be manipulated or waived. They'd won a battle, not the war. James Hawthorne sat in the front row, his face red with frustration. As people began filing out of the convention center, he approached Mike with barely controlled anger. "This isn't over, Tyson," he said quietly. "You may have friends in the media, but I have friends in the financial sector. Every business on that street depends on credit, permits, and city services. Things can get very difficult for people who stand in the way of progress." Mike looked at the developer with the same calm intensity he'd once reserved for opponents who talked too much before a fight. "Mr. Hawthorne, you just made 2 mistakes. First, you assumed I don't understand how the system really works. Second, you threatened the wrong people in front of the wrong person." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow seemed more dangerous than any shout. "I've been broke, I've been rich, I've been loved, and I've been hated. I've lost everything and built it back up again. But these people, Mrs. Chun, the Martinez family, all the families you want to displace, this is all they have. And threatening them means you're threatening me." Hawthorne stepped back, suddenly remembering who he was talking to. "This is a business matter, not a personal one. You made it personal the moment you decided to destroy people's lives for profit." Mike replied, "But here's what's going to happen. You're going to abandon this project. You're going to find somewhere else to build your condos. And you're going to leave this community alone. And if I don't?" Mike's smile was neither warm nor reassuring. Then you'll discover that I'm very good at fighting for things I believe in. And I believe in these people." Over the following weeks, the story took on a life of its own. Mike's social media posts about community resistance and corporate responsibility went viral worldwide. Celebrities began visiting Fulton Street, bringing attention and business to the local shops. Tourism boards started promoting the area as an authentic Brooklyn experience. More importantly, the residents themselves had discovered their collective power. They formed the Fulton Street Merchant and Resident Association, with Mrs. Chun as president and Mike as honorary advisor. They began attending every city council meeting, monitoring every development proposal, and supporting other communities facing similar threats. Hawthorne Development quietly withdrew their project proposal 3 months later, citing changed market conditions. Everyone understood the real reason. The community had made the political and public relations cost too high. Mike was returning from the community center one Tuesday morning when he found Mrs. Chun waiting by his car with a small wrapped package. "Mr. Mike," she said with a smile, "I wanted to give you something." Inside the package was a framed photograph of the entire Fulton Street community taken on the day of the city council meeting. In the center, Mike stood with Mrs. Chun, surrounded by hundreds of residents who'd found their voice. "Mrs. Chun, you didn't need to." "Yes, I did," she interrupted gently. "You taught us something important. You taught us that fighting for your community isn't just about winning or losing. It's about showing everyone, including yourself, what matters enough to fight for." Mike looked at the photograph, seeing faces he'd come to know and care about. The young mother whose daughter now played safely in the street. The elderly man who still lived independently in his apartment, full of memories. The Martinez family whose grocery store had become busier than ever. "You know what I learned, Mrs. Chen?" Mike said quietly. "I learned that the strongest opponents I ever faced weren't in the boxing ring. They were the battles I fought inside myself, against anger, against despair, against the belief that one person can't make a difference." He paused, looking down the street that was alive with the sounds of community. Children playing, neighbors talking, businesses thriving. But this fight? This was different. This wasn't about proving I was the strongest or the toughest. This was about proving that when people stand together, they're stronger than any corporation, any corrupt system, any force that tries to crush their dreams. Mrs. Chin nodded, understanding completely. "So what happens now, Mr. Mike? Do we go back to our regular lives?" Mike chuckled, thinking about all the calls he'd been getting from community organizations around the country facing similar battles. "Mrs. Chun, I don't think our lives are ever going to be regular again. And you know what? I'm perfectly fine with that." As he drove away, Mike caught sight of Mrs. Chun in his rearview mirror, unlocking her laundromat for another day of serving her community. The small act looked different now. Not just a business owner starting her workday, but a community leader taking her place on the front lines of a fight that would never truly end. The boy from Brooklyn who'd once fought his way to the heavyweight championship of the world had found a different kind of victory. He'd learned that the most important battles aren't fought for personal glory, but for the people who believe in you and the communities that make you who you are. Mike Tyson's brave heart had saved more than just one street. It had proven that in a world increasingly divided between those with power and those without it, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and say enough to change everything. The fight would continue, but now they were fighting together,